everyone, and welcome to this live broadcast about water scarcity. We're broadcasting today from the Ocean Science Center at the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California. As you watch our presentation, we encourage you to send your questions to us via Twitter using @AquariumPacific and the hashtag AOPWater, or you can send us an email at live@lbaop.org. This aquarium regularly brings the visual and the performing arts to create emotional connections of our visitors to big issues about nature, and water certainly is one of those. We're proud to have collaborated with the Annenberg Foundation in Los Angeles to bring an exhibition of photographs to the aquarium focusing on global water issues. The exhibition, Water, Our Thirsty World, is now on view in the aquarium's Great Hall, and anyone who buys a ticket to the aquarium can get to see it at no additional cost. Drought and access to fresh drinking water are issues that will only increase as population increases and as our climate continues to change. This exhibition highlights these issues in regions around the world, including Africa, Tibet, the Jordan River Basin, and California. It also examines the impacts that water scarcity has on wildlife, as well as on the human spiritual relationships of water in different cultures around the world. Water is our most precious natural resource. It's the only one for which there is no substitute. All life on Earth depends on water. And we've had the same water and the same amount of water on this planet for 4 billion years. It's been recycled countless times through the hydrologic cycle. What has changed is the human demand for water. Human population and our demands for water have ballooned. You have to keep in mind, we human beings have been around on this planet for less than 1/10 of 1% of the time that life has existed and that we have had water. And today, more than half of the world's population lives in water-stressed areas, and according to the United Nations, that number will increase to 2/3 by 2025, less than 10 years from now. Groundwater, which long was thought to be our safety valve, is now the world's most extracted natural resource. And we have to remember that it can take decades, centuries, and even longer to replenish groundwater once it's taken out. One of the big challenges is that often water is not where the people are. Around the world, and right here in California, we've engineered complex plumbing systems to move water from where it is to where we need it. Another major challenge is that 90% of the world's population live in countries that share water bodies with other nations, lakes, groundwater, rivers. And outside of North America and Europe, there are no agreements on how to share this water. And this is going to be very likely a growing problem as population grows, water becomes scarcer, and countries are not so eager to share with each other. And many of these regions are in areas of political unrest. North Africa, the Horn of Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Southwest, Central, and South Asia. The aggregate population in these areas is predicted to triple by the end of this century. So water shortages could well become flashpoints for regional and international conflicts. Another issue is that about half of the world's population lives in river basins that originate in mountain glaciers or snowpack. And climate change is reducing these reservoirs that for thousands of years collected precipitation during the wintertime and released it during the spring and the summer. California is an example of this, but an even more dramatic example is Tibet. Nearly half of the world's population lives within the watershed of the Tibetan Plateau. And at present trends, the estimate is that they could lose 2/3 of their glaciers in the next 40 years. In much of the world, shortage of fresh water is a looming crisis that will only be exacerbated by climate change and a growing population. Globally and in California, about 70% of all the water that's used goes to agriculture. Rapidly growing cities are also major centers for water demand and loss from leakage. We have the science, we have the engineering, we have the technology to reduce the amount of water used in agriculture and in cities. We could supply everyone on this planet with safe drinking water and enough water to grow their food. But it will take money, technology, political will, and cooperation. And learning how to share requires collaborative decision-making at intergovernmental levels. These issues are complex, politically, economically, and legally. And you have to have a place for nature at the table when you're making these allocations, because unless we can conserve nature, these allocations are not going to be sustainable. So the stakes are very high. And we have with us today two people who can help put this in perspective. Our first speaker is Kevin Wattier. He is the former general manager of the Long Beach Water Department. He served there with distinction and made this water department a model. He's going to speak about how water scarcity affects Southern California and how we can best prepare for a permanent culture of water conservation in our region. Kevin.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you for the Aquarium's continued leadership on important matters such as this. It's a tremendous opportunity to work with the Aquarium on an important issue like this. We're now, as we all know, in the fourth year of the most prolific, unprecedented drought in California. And actually, we've actually been in drought for 7 of the last 9 years. So we're in a very, very historic position in California. We don't know what's going to happen next. As Jerry mentioned, climate change is changing our hydrograph. We're seeing a dramatic reduction in our snowpack, at least in the last few years in California. We're seeing a population increase. And so, what we've been involved with here at the Long Beach, City of Long Beach, the Long Beach Water Department for many, many years is conservation. And what we've learned through our experience with water conservation is that water conservation is 100% a function of human behavior change. So that's why what we're doing here today is so important. It's when you get people's attention, when they understand a problem, when you inspire them to make changes, that's when things happen. It's not about rebates and widgets, it's about human behavior change. So these tremendous photos that we have on exhibit here show us how important water is, what an important part of our lives it is. And hopefully it will inspire people that come to this exhibit to take water more seriously, to treasure it, to see how precious it is to our lives, and to conserve it. So I'm very, very pleased with this partnership with the Annenberg Foundation and the Aquarium of the Pacific, because this is the kind of inspirational exhibit that I think people will see and understand, and hopefully they will say, I can do better, I can do more, and I'm going to do my part to help California through this drought, whether it comes to an end this year or whether this goes on for many, many years. So thank you very much for what you're doing here, and I welcome the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Kevin. And our next speaker is Camille Lowry with the Annenberg Foundation, and I want to acknowledge our gratefulness to Camille, to the Annenberg Foundation and the Annenberg Space for Photography for allowing us to bring this exhibit to our visitors. It will be here throughout the middle of February, and it will be seen by a very large number of people. So Camille, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Camille Lowry, and I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the Board of Directors for the Annenberg Foundation. The foundation created the Annenberg Space for Photography, a venue dedicated entirely to print and digital photography, to offer a place where visitors can see the world through a different lens and leave motivated to affect positive change, the change that Kevin was speaking about. The photography space informs and inspires the public by connecting photographers, philanthropy, and the human experience through powerful imagery and stories. And Water Our Thirsty World, this exhibit, was one of our first exhibits at the Annenberg Space for Photography. It was created 5 years ago in 2010 in partnership with National Geographic to coincide with a special issue that the magazine was putting out that was devoted entirely to the subject of the precarious state of the world's fresh water. This partnership provided an important opportunity to start a conversation about the world we share and the water we cherish, and the ways that we must secure it for our future. We are delighted that this conversation will continue here at the Aquarium for the Pacific, and we're so pleased that the Aquarium will be displaying these powerful images for a new audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille. And before we go to the questions, I should point out that this sphere behind me, there are 110 of these around the world. And every time an organization creates new content, you make it available at no cost to all of the other institutions. And our AV staff here has created more original content than any of the other 109 institutions. And they're creating the story about the world's water crisis that will go along with this exhibit. And it will have its premiere on November 1 of this year, and so we hope that you will all come back and take a look at that. Now, let's see. Dave Bader, Director of Education, do we have any questions?
We do. First question was, is California's drought currently the worst in the world?
Is California's drought the worst in the world? Kevin, you probably should answer that. Wait, you have to come over here to the microphone.
Well, I don't know if it's the worst in the world, but it's certainly, in terms of impact, it's certainly the worst in California's history. We've had other droughts of similar magnitude when you simply look at precipitation. 1928 to 1934 is kind of the classic drought. If you simply look at precipitation, this drought isn't as bad as that drought yet. But of course, our world has changed dramatically since 1928 to 1934. I mentioned earlier we now have about 39 million people relying on this same water, as Jerry mentioned, that we've had for 4 billion years. So in terms of impact, when you look at climate change, loss of snowpack, population increase, clearly this is the largest drought in terms of impact that California has ever seen.
Camille, would you like to add to that? No. All right. Well, we have the second question.
Again, Kevin, you mentioned conservation. So what conservation efforts at home make the biggest impact?
So another one for Kevin. What conservation efforts at home will make the biggest impact?
Well, you know, we've done a great job in Southern California for many years at indoor conservation, and we've achieved some significant reductions. So what remains is outdoor, and that's what we and all California, Southern California in particular, agencies are now focused on, is landscape. We simply are no longer in the position, this is my own personal perspective, we're no longer have the luxury of living in Southern California as if we were living in Illinois or Ohio growing grass. We simply, that was a mistake. We should never have done it. It's a very difficult process to make that change, but we simply have to do this. We simply have to quit growing so much grass here in Southern California. Beautiful California landscapes can reduce our water consumption by at least 25% at a typical single-family home. That's the kind of dramatic change that we need to see. It's going to be very expensive, but quite frankly, I don't think we have any choice but to make that conversion here in Southern California and reduce the consumption by, again, at least 25% by converting to these beautiful California landscapes, such as we've been promoting here in Long Beach for many years.
Camille, would you like to add to that? You're going to go with it? Well, I'm going to add to that. Over the last 10 years, this aquarium's attendance has grown by 50%, from 1 million to 1.5 million. And over that period of time, we have reduced the amount of fresh water that we use by 25%. And it was a combination of the things that Kevin talked about. We've changed the facilities in all of our restrooms. You think 1.5 million people going to the bathroom here, so we could save a lot of water there. And we have replaced much of our grass with drought-tolerant vegetation and California native landscaping. And then we've let some of our grass just die. That's not the preferred option, though. All right, Dave, another one.
There's a question about future exhibits for the
All right, this is definitely for Camille. Future exhibits, and we've had, now this is our second.
Yes.
We hope that we're in the queue to have many more exhibits from you, and you've got millions of people watching, so don't reject me.
Oh, no, we would love that. We would love that. We're really pleased with our partnership here with you, and we hope it continues. In terms of for the Annenberg Space for Photography, our next exhibit actually does touch on the natural world. It will open in just a few weeks. It's Franz Lanting Life, and it's an entire exhibit about his images of animals and the origin of life here, and it's really quite artistic and scientific. And that's what's up next for us. But we always go out of our way to make sure that we shine a light on photojournalism and issues that touch the human experience. So hopefully there'll be something else that's perfect for this place.
We hope so. And our exhibit next summer is going to deal with the loss of species, and the loss of fresh water is a major driver. Freshwater species are the ones that we have lost the greatest number of species, the greatest percentage. And in the terrestrial environment, we have lost huge amounts of biodiversity. What we want to do is avoid having that happen in the ocean, and it will require changes in behavior. And so that exhibit would be very important. And I think the next one you have is on migrations and refugees. And environmental refugees are a growing problem. We have refugees because of war and political unrest. But if you look ahead, we will have more and more environmental refugees, particularly from areas that will be drowned by a rising sea. Bangladesh is one area. Another area are islands in the Pacific. And many countries, if you're a refugee, they're not anxiously awaiting our arrival. It's partly because of demands on resources, but somehow, as a global society, we have to solve these problems. So we hope we can work with you on that one, too. Dave?
So a couple questions, I think, around the idea is the water gone away? Is it moving somewhere? So some places are in drought, maybe some places are getting more rain. What's happening to the water globally?
All right, Kevin, you want to talk about what's happening? And I guess this would be a good one to connect to El Nino, too.
Yeah, I'll kind of touch on El Nino because that's, of course, what we read and hear a lot about. First of all, we are in an El Nino. The question is, what does it mean? And of course, if I knew that, I wouldn't be here. I'd be very wealthy. But we're in an El Nino. We will be in an El Nino. What El Nino means is that the Pacific Ocean temperature along the equator is warmer than normal, and we will be in an El Nino through this winter. That's virtually a certainty. The question is, what does it mean? And I think what Californians need to understand is everything's important, but what's most important to us in urban California is what happens in Northern California, because that's where the big variable comes in terms of our water supplies. And what El Nino typically means, it means an increased chance of additional precipitation in the Pacific Southwest, where we are. It means an additional chance of drier than normal weather in the Pacific Northwest, which is not good news for Washington and Oregon, which are already having historic droughts. And what it means in Northern California is absolutely nothing. Northern California is kind of the swing spot between it being drier than normal in the Northwest and wetter than normal in the Southwest. So you see a lot in the newspapers lately about we're likely to have a wet winter here in Southern California. I hope that's true. It would be good if it is. But there's no strong signal between El Nino and Northern California precipitation. The other thing that's happening that's clearly something we've been expecting, but now it's happening, is the loss of our snowpack. And the question is, why is that so important? Well, in California, we've relied on our snowpack to be our largest reservoir. It's our largest reservoir, and our big water systems in California have all been designed around that snowpack peaking out in April and then slowly melting in May and June and July and trickling into the reservoirs and then moving that water throughout California. When that snowpack turns to rain, that completely changes how those large water systems operate. And again, that's a huge loss in terms of our reservoir storage by having seen our hydrology convert from mostly snow to a lot of rain lately.
Ron, I had a footnote. So we have the same amount of water, and it's the same water that we've had for 4 billion years. The partitioning between freshwater and saltwater has changed dramatically over geologic time, and that's why we see fluctuations in sea level. And the other thing that has changed is the partitioning of fresh water between the liquid, solid, and vapor phases. And so when some areas get wet, some get dry, but it's the same water recycled many times. So every one of you who had a cup of coffee this morning, there were a few molecules from Cleopatra's bathwater in your coffee. Another one.
Is there one image in the exhibit that might really be the most impactful for people or for any of you?
Is there one image in the exhibit that has the greatest impact? I think you each should answer this. Maybe we'll start with you, Camille, because these are all your images, and I know it's like picking what's your favorite child, but which exhibit?
Well, I can really speak more personally. I don't know if it's a specific image, but the story of the women gathering the water and with their children in Africa, I think really is a stark image and really impactful for me. The idea that some people can devote their whole life, their whole day, to trekking miles to try and find fresh water is something that's inconceivable for us here in California. They can just turn on our spigot. And if we don't be careful, in many, many years, we could be in some dire straits like that too. So.
Kevin, do you have a favorite?
Well, of course, being a water guy, the most important one to me is there's a picture of the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta and some of the levees and islands and some homes that are being developed there, because that, is the most important area for us in terms of water development. And so that development of what's happening in the Delta and how that's going to change with sea level rise is critically important to all of us in California.
And I think with the problems with not enough water, the burden usually falls on women and children, and that has to be a big issue for concern. And I would add to what Kevin said about the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. We traditionally have gotten about half of our water from importing it down from the Delta. The Delta is a very vulnerable area, not just because of snowpack, but much of it is below sea level, with sea level rising, and it's protected by earthen dikes like the kinds that were in New Orleans before Katrina. So it's unstable, and so that's something that we in California really have to be concerned about. I want to thank our two guest speakers, and I want to thank all of you for being with us. And now we will end this broadcast, but our speakers will be available for individual interviews with all of you from the media.